Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here is the video that you came here for. But we're going to start the show. We got a crazy update on the Jaden Rashada story. Jaden Rashada, the high 4-star, low 5-star, whatever, quarterback, the NIL stuff. It came out about 2-3 weeks ago. Well, The Athletic put out a very interesting, detailed piece on everything that happened. Jaden Rashada's part, his parents' part, the boosters' part, all that good stuff. So this is the new schedule for the Aaron Torres pod this week. We're going to do a full show today. Jaden Rashada, then we will talk to JJ about all sorts of whatever with New York. Probably no Wednesday show. My Tuesday night is a little bit hectic. I don't know if I'll be able to do the Wednesday show. So let's plan on the Monday show I just did, the Tuesday show today, and then I will reconnect later in the week on whatever the late week show looks like. Obviously, we'll talk Super Bowl. We'll talk anything that happened in college hoops. Tuesday is a loaded night, Arkansas at Kentucky amongst the many games there. And I might have a guest for you come Friday, so stay tuned. We'll do maybe a Thursday, Friday, maybe just a Friday episode of the Aaron Torres pod. But this is the show of record for the middle of the week, if you will. So John Jastrzemski coming up. But with that said, whoo, buddy, let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, listen, as I said, this was supposed to be a quick 20-minute in and out Aaron Torres pod. Just one problem. On Monday morning, we got some very interesting details on everything that happened with Jaden Rashada, the 4-star quarterback, had been committed to Florida, decommits. It's crazy. There's NIL, blah, 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 this and that. And so we got all sorts of updates on this. We heard about what happened from his family's perspective, from the Florida perspective, how much money was actually offered. It is staggering. So I don't want to waste any more time. I want to give you the details of what we knew, what we learned on Tuesday or on Monday, and then most importantly, what I kind of think of all of it, right? So let's start from the beginning, and I'm just going to give you the 30-second who Jaden Rashada is for people who may not be familiar. But this was the highly rated quarterback. Last summer, he made headlines, was a Florida lean, set to commit to Florida, sets a commitment date, last second decides to, quote unquote, take a visit to Miami, and all of a sudden he commits to Miami. At the time, there's NIL tampering allegations. He was going to go to Florida, but blah, 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 blah. I bring it up because in the fall, he decides, you know what? I do want to go to Florida. Flips from Miami to Florida, and all seems well and good until about 3 weeks ago when it was time for him to actually enroll at Florida. All his stuff is shipped to the state of Florida. This kid is from California. And then we find out that he's not enrolling in Florida. All his stuff's in the state. And we find out through the grapevine and good reporting from multiple outlets that basically the NIL deal that Jaden Rashada had agreed to, Florida basically voided it. They just said, we're not paying you. And so over the last 2-3 weeks, Jaden Rashada has since kind of regrouped. I feel bad for the kid. We'll get into that. But he decommitted from Florida, got out of his letter of intent. He ultimately signed with Arizona State. He's a West Coast kid from the Bay Area. His dad played at Arizona State. But over the last couple of weeks, there's just been this crazy kind of want to know all of the details of everything that happened in this recruitment and how did we get here? How was he committed to Florida, signed with Florida, set to enroll on campus, basically in Southern Florida, playing in the Under Armour All-American game, set to go to Gainesville, never shows up because the school isn't going to, not the school, the collective isn't going to pay him. Well, on Monday, we got some details courtesy of a great report from The Athletic. And listen, I don't know all the guys over there. Used to work with Stu Mandel, used to work with Bruce Feldman, have an immense amount of respect for those guys, Andy Staples, all of the people that worked on this story. Want to give credit to The Athletic because they did an unbelievable job on this story. But the question becomes, Torres, what did we learn in this story? Well, first we learned how much Jaden Rashada was getting paid, what he was going to have to do, and all the circumstances around it. So how much was he going to get paid? There had been reports that it was upwards of $13 million. Some outlets said that number was insane. That wasn't even close to the actual number. Well, as it turns out, it was pretty close to that number. Here's what we found out via The Athletic on payments to Jaden Rashada. Again, a high four-star recruit, four-star quarterback in the class of 2023 from the University of Florida, from one of their collectives. He was going to get paid, are you ready for this? $500,000 up front, basically the day that he signed. Then a $250,000 payment every single month for his freshman year, $291,666.66 every month for his junior year, or for his sophomore year, $375,000 for his junior year. And if he was still there for a senior year, and the assumption is he's going to be 3 and done, he'll be out of college by then. But if he is there, his quote unquote salary, if you will, his NIL agreement is probably the right way to put it, would bump down to $195,000 a month. So that was what he was about to get paid. And here is what he had to do for the NIL portion of it, the name, image, likeness. He must be endorsing something big, right? Well, not exactly. According to the Athletics report, here is what he had to do. He had to be a resident of Gainesville, Florida. Had to be just in the city. He had to do at least one branded Twitter post and one branded Instagram post per month. He had to do up to 8 fan engagements per year. So just basically show up, sign autographs, social media engagements, video, whatever that might be. None of them were obligated to be longer than 2 hours. And he must sign at least 15 pieces of merchandise per year. The one caveat, and we're going to find out a little bit about that in a minute, is that the contract also stipulated that the collective can, in its sole and absolute discretion, terminate the agreement without penalty or further obligation. And that is exactly what happened in late December, when the collective basically just said, you know what? We ain't going to pay this. And so that is what happened. That is what we found out. This was from a contract, obtained by The Athletic. And now let's talk about some thoughts on what I just told you, because those details are insane. All right, so let's get into it. Let's discuss, let's debate. I got about 5-6 thoughts. I'm just going to throw them at you one after one after one. The first one, that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. And so here's the thing. I'll be honest. Obviously, as all of this stuff was going on, I made calls to some people that I kind of are in the know, and how much do you know, and blah, 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 and this and that. And what I was kind of told was that the reported $13 million number wasn't necessarily wrong, but that it wasn't like an NFL contract. Like what I was told was that it was very incentive based, right? It was if you're named a starter, you get this, there's a base level of money that he was going to make, but that if you get named starter, you get this much. If you win this many games, you get that much. If you win the SEC East, you get that much. If you win the SEC, you get that much. Almost like a coach's contract, where yes, a coach has a base salary, but if you win the SEC, if you go to the playoff, if you make the national championship, if you win the national championship, you get more. That was my understanding of what Jaden Rashada's contract was. I was completely wrong, because this is a flat out, basically a professional contract. Now, we'll get into the quote unquote NIL element of it in a minute, but I'm blown away. $250,000 a month for a kid that had never taken a snap in college is an insane amount of money. I'll give you an example. Brock Purdy, 7th round pick. He made as a base salary as a rookie this year. This was the guy that led San Francisco to the NFC Championship game, won 2 playoff games. Brock Purdy made $934,000. Jaden Rashada was set to make that in less than 4 months. If you take the $500,000 signing bonus with the $250,000 a month, in 2 months, he was going to make more than Brock Purdy made in his entire rookie year with San Francisco. So this is an insane amount of money. And it leads to kind of my second thought. My second thought is, one, don't blame the kid, because really don't blame the kid also plays into what kind of my third thought is, which is, I hate to say I told you so, but we all knew this is what NIL was going to become. And so a couple of things here. One, from the beginning, from back in 2018, 2019, 2020, when the first NIL legislation first went through all these kind of government entities, I said from the beginning, I'm not anti-NIL. What I'm not personally in favor of, and it doesn't really matter what I'm personally in favor of, but what I said was, I'm not in favor of NIL without any regulations at all. Because one, NIL without any regulations at all immediately becomes pay for play. And then two, when there's NIL without any regulations at all, when the schools can't be involved, you know what ends up happening? Unscrupulous adults get involved as well. And so in a perfect world, and again, I don't have all the answers. I'm not anti-players getting paid. But I think we all understand that when this started, it was supposed to be, you can sell your jersey or you can do an autograph signing or whatever. It wasn't supposed to be, we're just throwing bags of cash at 4-star quarterback recruits. Now, again, these are the rules. This is what somebody was willing to pay. So I am not anti-Jaden Rashada or even anti-Jaden Rashada's family. But when you do this without any guidelines, without any stipulations, without any rules, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have parents that are essentially pimping out their kids. And to be clear, that is what Harlan Rashada, Jaden Rashada's dad, did. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but in the article, there's a couple references to a couple different things. One, whenever they would go on visits, they'd kind of sort of ask, hey, what's kind of your NIL setup? And then a few days later, a lawyer would call that school and say, hey, this is what we're expecting to sign with your school. And what we actually found out was that several schools actually pulled scholarship offers from this kid because they saw right away that it was going to be a bidding war, and this is not what they wanted to get involved in. So one, when you have NIL without any regulations, the schools can't get involved. You have outside entities from the collectives. You have outside entities from whatever. You get situations like this, where on the one hand, don't love the way that Jaden Rashada's dad handled things. I should mention, by the way, even in the article, they said that Jaden Rashada wanted to commit to Florida from the beginning, committed to Miami because that was the best setup at that time. Decommits to Miami, commits to Florida because that's where he wants to go. But now this whole thing gets botched, and this kid isn't even going to the school that he wants. By the way, this is not all on the Rashada family or Rashada's, people either. A lot of this is on Florida and their collectives as well. Now, listen. They wrote the contract the way that they did for a very specific reason. If at any point they wanted to get out and he wasn't worth it, it sounds like this was actually a very one-sided contract. It sounds to me, and I could be wrong, I'm not a lawyer. If we have a lawyer listening, feel free to reach out to me. You can email me, Aaron Torres, podcastquestions@gmail.com. But the actual verbiage of the contract said that the collective can, in its sole and absolute discretion, terminate the agreement without penalty or further obligation. So if I'm reading that correct, it means that if the collective didn't terminate this thing before this kid ever enrolled, they could have decided after spring ball, oh, he's not the guy. Let's get out of this. They could have decided next year when he isn't named the starter, oh, he's not the guy. Let's get out of this. They could have whatever after a year, after 2 years. And this kid maybe wants to stay at Florida, and all of a sudden he's guaranteed this much money, and now it's all gone. So blame the adults in this situation. Don't blame the kid. I actually feel bad for the kid. We're going to get into some more details in a minute because there's just some really, really sad stuff here. Couple other thoughts. One, for many of you wondering, two quick things. One, this is how NIL now works because, again, we put it in without any guardrails. Now, I don't believe the NCAA is going to do anything even with this report out that this was essentially pay for play because, one, the NCAA doesn't want to get into litigation. Two, if they stop this, it could be seen as impeding kind of a free market. By the way, this is why I wanted guardrails, but I knew the NCAA wasn't going to put one in, but weren't going to put any in because if they do, then they're setting themselves up for litigation. So I don't believe the NCAA is going to get involved, even though this is obviously pay for play. But at the same time, I thought it was very interesting some of the expectations, if you want to call them that, of Jaden Rashada when he got to campus. Sounds like a pretty loose NIL deal for me. Up to 8 fan engagements per year, 1 branded Twitter post per year, autograph 15 pieces of merchandise total, like 15 footballs total. That's the whole obligation. And so what that says to me is something that I started to hear about a year ago as more and more of these collectives popped up and we knew they were going to have a role in recruiting. What I was basically told was, yeah, all these collectives, they're just flat giving kids money and they're calling it NIL. And they basically are saying like, okay, once you get to campus, we'll figure out a way for you to do something for us. But just sign on the dotted line. Just come be part of what we're doing. We'll figure out the NIL part later. So this is very much pay for play. No, I don't believe the NCAA is going to do anything. But as we start to wrap up, I will say one thing. I do think this is a little bit of an eye-opener for the public, but I also think it's an eye-opener to what I think the next wave of NIL looks like. And I've talked about this before. But listen, everybody looks bad in this situation. Whether we should be blaming Jaden Rashada or not, and we should not be blaming Jaden Rashada. His family, okay. Florida's boosters, okay. Florida, because we know they had to know something was going on, okay. But at the same time, what this says to me, I do think we are slowly going to inch towards a world where we kind of get out of this space, where we get out of bidding for high school recruits and more of the money is funneled to players actually on campus. This is something we've talked about a million times on this show. But first of all, there's always going to be a market for elite 5-star players, especially quarterbacks, especially edge rushers, all that stuff. But I do think we're eventually going to get to a world where these boosters are going to say, wait a second, I'm guaranteeing $250K a month to a 4-star quarterback? I don't even know if he's going to be any good. Let me pay that to the guys currently in the program. And I think that's where we're headed. You know, I talked about all this, but when Mark Stoops in the middle of the season basically called out his administration and said our NIL is behind, I never believed that Mark Stoops was going to buy recruits. I think what Mark Stoops was afraid of was that his players were going to enter the portal because they felt like there was going to be a better alternative out there for them financially. I told you, I spoke with somebody who kind of runs one of these collectives, helps with one of these collectives in Big Ten country. He said, just because, you know, we're not in the headlines, our guys are getting very well taken care of. It's just not in the way that some other schools are doing it. We're not going out there and just bidding on recruits. But once our kids get to campus, once they produce, we're making sure that they know that they are very well taken care of. And that's the way it should be, by the way, right? That's the way it should be. You come to campus, you earn your spot, you produce, you create revenue and create value for the school. You should be compensated for that. You should be compensated. I'm just going to throw out a number. You should be given a couple grand, $5,000, $10,000, whatever, to show up to a dinner or a meet and greet or an autograph session if you've done something. So I think that's where we're getting. I think that's where we are. But this still is a shocking article on just how this is really going on right now behind the scenes in college football. Now, as we wrap a couple things. One, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Be very interested in what happens with Florida's 2024 recruiting class. Now, right now, it's not terrible. They actually have a 5-star quarterback committed, which is the ironic part, out of Florida, DJ Lagway. But I'll be very curious to see how they recruit in 2024. Because I will tell you, if I was at Florida State, if I was at Miami, if I was at Alabama, if I was at Georgia, and one of these kids was considering Florida, I'd sit there and say, is that really where you want to go? That's really where you want to go. Because you saw what happened with Rashada. You ain't going to get paid. So they're going to promise you something they're just not going to deliver. Very curious to see what happens with Billy Napier. And then finally, I'm very curious to see what happens with Jaden Rashada. And I can't emphasize this enough. And this is one of the reasons, again, I was never anti-NIL. But there need to be guardrails because people get taken advantage of. And often it's the kid. It's the 17, 18, 19-year-old that has no life experience. They just want to play football. They just want to play basketball. And the adults behind the scenes are making decisions. Unfortunately, this has been going on for far too long, and we all know stories just like this. But think about this kid. There was a story in the Athletic report of Jaden Rashada after he committed to Miami, showing up to Elite 11, and everybody knowing this kid got that NIL bag, and all the eyes are on him. How good is he? Is he worth everything that he's reportedly getting? And after the first day, after camp is done, he's struggling, and he's there crying because the pressure is getting to him in a way that he could never imagine. And so I'll be honest, I'm a Jaden Rashada fan. I'm wishing him well. I hope he goes to Arizona State. He's not going to start this year, I don't believe. Drew Pine, the transfer from Notre Dame, Connecticut kid, stand up, baby. I think Drew Pine is probably going to be the guy. And then we'll see if Jaden Rashada is good enough in 2024 to earn that starting spot. Last thought really quick. I thought it was very interesting. According to the report, and I saw Andy Staples tweet this as well, the belief is that Jaden Rashada is getting nothing in NIL to go to Arizona State. So you talk about a situation where the adults in this situation were just, evil's not the right word, but just so disappointing. A father who doesn't let his kid go where he wants to go, a bunch of boosters who screw it all up because they made promises they can't keep or they decided not to keep. It's disappointing. I know everybody's anti-NCAA. They hate the NCAA. But I'll tell you, I do hope that we get some sort of guardrails or regulations in this where we're going to hear a lot more stories like this.